Well, when the EA exclusivity deal ended, we all thought the golden age of Star Wars games would return. A game by Ubisoft Massive, the KOTOR remake, a High Republic game by Quantic Dream. It seemed like Star Wars games were back in business. But right now here in 2025, that is far from the truth. In fact, it's looking a little bit rough, but there still may be cause for some optimism. I think for many of us Star Wars fans, we grew up in a purple patch of Star Wars games. I mean, 2002, Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast. 2003, KOTOR. 2005, Republic Commando, Battlefront 2, Revenge of the Sith. 2006, Empire at War. 2008, Force Unleashed. Not to mention, in that time, Rogue Squadron, Lego Star Wars, Starfighter, KOTOR 2. You get the point. Since DICE's reimagining of Star Wars Battlefront in 2015, we have had 2 Battlefront games, 2 Jedi games, Squadrons and Star Wars Outlaws, and some nice work by Aspyr with porting some of the older games. Now, there's a lot of things we can chalk that down to, mainly EA's exclusivity deal, but it's more the roadmap of what's coming and what's been cancelled as what is going on. Let's start with the KOTOR remake, because this project means a lot to a lot of people. This is considered as one of the best RPGs of all time, and yet, what a hell of a development cycle this game is having. In development by Aspyr, taken away from Aspyr, handed to Saber, sold by Embracer Group, and now nobody knows. The Saber Interactive CEO did confirm that all announced projects by them are still in development, but nobody knows how long away we are, how far it is. There's a lot. And Saber have a lot on their plate too, by the way. Space Marine 2 support, Space Marine 3, a partnership with Hasbro. There's a lot of video games that they have on their plate as well, so who knows when we're going to get this one. And KOTOR is a big video game. It is a massive undertaking. I did say that when I finished Space Marine 2, one thing that captured me with Space Marine is that it really made me love the Warhammer franchise. And if they can put that same labour of love that they put into the Warhammer games into KOTOR, I do think that could be a well done remake that captures that original game's essence, brings it to the modern day, and feels like the KOTOR that we played back then, but with a modern day setting. But there's a lot riding on that one. I really do hope that they get it right, but it feels like this game is years away still. Years, and it was announced in what, 2021 at that big PlayStation showcase? I mean, another massive concern is Star Wars Eclipse. That game's debut trailer was sensational. I mean, one of the best Star Wars trailers I think I've ever seen. It was visually incredible. The audio of it was sensational, but we don't know shit about this video game right now. There's also been many reports about the culture over at Quantic Dream, which nobody ever wants to hear. And despite that trailer's initial fantastic reaction, it's been radio silence. In fact, the game has lost its lead writer ever since, who announced they're working at a new studio alongside all these cultural problems that the studio is facing. One of their marketing heads did come out and say it was still simmering, but when I think about this with these 2 massive projects with KOTOR and Eclipse, and for me as a Star Wars fan that loves the originals and the prequels, and there's aspects of the sequels that I do like, I want to be in these eras now. I'm so tired of, for as much as I love Darth Vader, right? And what Disney in particular have done with his image and how they've gave him these incredible scenes that have created this presence every time he's on screen. I am so sick of Darth Vader cameos. I am so sick of Stormtroopers. I'm so sick of projects set between 3 and 4 that was once a cool period. Now it's massively played out. Eclipse and KOTOR give us 2 periods of time that as Star Wars fans we know very little about. So I want to play these and explore them in that way. And I think for this universe in particular, playing offers a different level of immersion than watching Star Wars Acolyte, or if they did a KOTOR movie. I would much rather play a video game set during these times. So there are 2 games that are kind of in limbo. And then there's the cancellations. Hot off the press is Star Wars Hunters, a game that was exclusive to both mobile and Switch, that was slated for PC in January, held a technical test in December, and then was indefinitely delayed to work on some features. Well, that delay is now a cancellation, as it's never going to release on PC and is ending support after Season 5. And this one, to be honest, it stings a little bit. I played that technical test back in December and I had fun. You know, there was a lot of fun cosmetics in there that had things like Starkiller inspired outfits. It was a labor of love to Star Wars. I will admit though that it's probably the one that hurts the least out of the games that have been cancelled or the games that we know about, because even though in the 2 hours I played of it, it was a fun time, it did feel like a very, very shallow experience in what is a very competitive PvP market right now. You got Marvel Rivals, Overwatch, soon you'll have Marathon, Call of Duty, Fortnite, all these PvP games that just take up massive market share. And I'll be honest, even though I was looking forward to this game coming out and making some content on it and playing it, I'm not sure it had the legs to sustain what this game probably would have needed to do from a development cycle. And yeah, it obviously didn't have any of the big IP characters that Star Wars is known for, and that doesn't help, of course, but I'm not surprised that this one was... It probably didn't bring in the interest that it needed to on PC, is what I imagine as to why this game got cancelled. And it's a massive shame because it's, once again, one of the biggest problems I have with Star Wars games at the moment is every time May 4th comes around and it's Star Wars Day, right? The best Star Wars game to play on May 4th isn't a Star Wars game. It's Fortnite. That's the game that always does the best celebration of Star Wars, and that is insane to me that Star Wars doesn't have this ongoing player versus player game or PvE game. And I know there is Star Wars The Old Republic, but I've tried to get into it. I just can't. I did ages and ages ago, but for me now that game just feels too old, and Star Wars needs something new in that space. The other game that was cancelled was the game from Respawn. It was never officially announced, but it was a first-person Mandalorian game. And if there is anyone I wanted a first-person Star Wars shooter from, yet alone a Mandalorian game, it's Respawn Entertainment. Some light features came out about it, about the central base of operations. You'd select your bounty, and it had a linear level experience. You'd complete your bounty, and then you'd be able to pick a slew of upgrades from armor to your spaceship, and then you'd face off against stormtroopers. And look, for as much as I just said that I'm tired of stormtroopers, a Mandalorian bounty game is what the doctor ordered. So it's devastating that that's not going to happen. So I'm kind of asking myself at this point, what is going on? I know the video game industry has shifted where quality levels are so much higher now. For as much as we all love The Force Unleashed as a cult classic, if a game like that came out now, it would be destroyed for its rough edges or its story. But one of my biggest problems with the franchise as a whole, not just in video games, is that Star Wars has become so safe and so confined that we're constantly seeing the same plot beats and characters played out over and over again. For a universe that is meant to be so wide and expansive, we sure do just retread the same things over and over. You know, speaking on that golden era, it was such a breath of experiences, from multiplayer, tactical squad-based first-person shooters, RTSs, space combat, RPGs, movie tie-ins, most importantly, spanning all eras. As I said, for as much as I've enjoyed these Darth Vader cameos that have led to some of the coolest scenes in the Star Wars period, I'm tired of these eras. I'm not tired of these characters as a whole, but it's become so saturated that even when Star Wars Outlaws goes and pulls one of the most incredible visual versions of Darth Vader I've ever seen, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But then I feel a bit empty after it because we've seen it played out so much. I am ready for a new experience in a new timeline, in a new galaxy with new characters that can still feel like Star Wars at the core of it. And I don't think there's a better place than video games to do something like that. It looks like we are going to get some more variety in the games. BitReactor at Star Wars Celebration is going to drop the first look at its turn-based combat game, which details are very light on so far. They are working with Respawn on this, and if Respawn get one thing, they get Star Wars, so I am really excited to get a look at this next month. Especially with this being a turn-based game, I think that could offer some really exciting gameplay potential and something that we've not had in a Star Wars game for a very long time. And finally, of course, we have Jedi 3, which is confirmed to be the final game that EA are making, Respawn in particular, and the final game with a trilogy. So after that, it seems like EA are done with Star Wars, with other than BitReactor, of course. We don't know which one of those are going to come first. So, as a slate of games, it's not looking great. And despite the fact that I love those Jedi games, I did not expect Respawn, who are known for their first-person shooters, to crank out a third-person Jedi game that is so good. There were also rumours of a Total War Star Wars game from reports last year. That might be happening, we're not too sure. It seems likely, and I think it makes sense logically. There's also still Amy Hennig's game, which we still have no details on, despite the fact that this was announced before their Marvel game, but it looks like the Marvel game is actually going to ship before the Star Wars one does. But I'm just looking at the Star Wars franchise in general, and I'm just seeing wasted potential. Where's the 2D Sith Metroidvania game? Where is the big multiplayer shooter Battlefront game that is such an iconic video game franchise? Especially when you pair that with all the TV shows that we've had, like the Clone Wars ending, Andor, Acolyte, Mandalorian, all these characters that would fit like a glove in the Battlefront series. Listen, I think Lucasfilm Games have the right model in licensing IP to studios that make sense. The same way that they do with Marvel, rather than building their own teams to make their own games. But I also worry that the risk of a Star Wars game is so high now. I mean, we saw from the unfortunate Insomniac hack just how chunky the cut Disney take is from their Marvel games. I imagine it is very similar to how Star Wars games are, and with how expensive video games are to make, I would not be surprised as to why that's EA cut the Mandalorian deal in the first place. Why Ubisoft likely won't make an Outlaws 2, despite the fact they've spent years making the assets for Outlaws. I'm talking purely out of speculation, of course, but when you take a look at how long video games take to make, the cost of video games, and then you pair that with how many copies you need to sell to make it a success, you can see why, on top of all the ongoing costs and factors, an IP license of, let's say, 20-30%, you add that into it, it becomes a massive task to make that a success. So you can see why Star Wars games, people aren't queuing up to make them. I'm sure across all the video game studios, there is Star Wars fans that would love to make a Star Wars game, but when you have those kind of costs, I'm sure it's a problem. So yeah, there's some optimism on Star Wars, of course, but this is not what I think any of us expected leaving that EA exclusivity deal. So when we saw Ubisoft Massive were going to make a Star Wars game, we're all thinking, whoa, okay, we are straight into it here. But it's just not panned out in the way that we all thought it would. Personally, I don't even like talking about Star Wars Online anymore, man. Other than video games, because this shit's just exhausting. There is discourse about absolutely everything. And even something like Acolyte, which was okay. There was some amazing scenes in it, and there was some stuff in it that was just really bad, and some of the writing was terrible. But everything has to either be the best thing ever or the worst. It's just like internet in general, isn't it? But I still think there is so much, especially when it comes to video games. Like, I think Star Wars lends itself so well to video games. Sure, you can get a Jedi, be a really cool thing, but the feeling and fantasy of being a Jedi in a video game, so much cooler. Same would apply to being a Sith, the same would apply to being a Republic Commando, whatever it might be. I think Star Wars lends itself so well to video games, and I just don't think right now it's being capitalized on. And I feel like we're retreading the same things over and over. Battlefront 2, for example, is year on year in PlayStation Network's top 20 most downloaded games. How are we not recognizing there is a massive market right there? Especially when you look at what Marvel Rivals has done, which, I'll be honest, I enjoy, but I think it's just an okay game in terms of how it actually plays. The source is in what it's doing with the Marvel IP in its cosmetics, characters, and in its world. So look, at the end of the day, there is going to be stuff coming that I'm sure is being worked on that hasn't even been announced yet, and maybe there is nothing to be concerned about, but I'm looking at Star Wars Eclipse and KOTOR, two games that me personally, I'm desperate for to get out and away from the Skywalker saga and all the shenanigans involved in that. I'm excited to see what BitReactor are doing with a turn-based game that, you know, they're making pretty lofty claims in terms of how it's going to redefine certain aspects. I think that's quite exciting. It doesn't obviously have the mass appeal, but I'll be interested to see how that kind of sells. Outlaws, for all of its flaws, I think still is a pretty good Star Wars experience. Absolutely has problems that they have resolved some of them since launch, and I'm excited for its final DLC with Hondo, and I hope that that team gets to make a sequel and address, because I think it's so slept on in the video game industry, the leap between the first game in a series and the sequel. Mass Effect to Mass Effect 2, even though some people's favourite Mass Effect is the first one, the jump in quality to 2 is incredible. Assassin's Creed is another great example. Batman Arkham, my favourite video game franchise, is another great example. Even the Battlefront games themselves. I mean, look at Pandemic's Battlefront to Battlefront 2. Look at DICE's Battlefront to Battlefront 2. Look at Star Wars Jedi, from Jedi Fallen Order to Jedi Survivor. Everything in Survivor is better, maybe apart from the story, which is maybe a little bit stronger in the first game. We've got to start giving series a sequel to correct a lot of what's going on. But I understand that obviously it's still a business at the end of the day. But look, I'm going to stop rambling. I'm concerned as to how Star Wars Games' future is looking, especially when we kind of all did the victory lap of when the EA exclusivity deal ended. We all thought we're back in the golden era, and who knows, that we might be in a couple years time, but right now it's looking a little bit rough with cancellations and not much to go on in terms of announced projects with updates or anything like that. But let me know, how are you thinking? Are you feeling optimistic about the future of Star Wars games? Are you concerned? If there is one Star Wars game you could green light, what would that be? Anyway, if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, dropping a like on the video would be really, really helpful. And if you're after Star Wars content, news, reviews, guides, whenever video games do drop, make sure you subscribe, because we'll absolutely be covering it over here. Other than that, all my socials are linked in the description down below. Regardless, I hope you have a terrific day. Play games, get gains, and I will catch you in the next one.